Hollywood Impact Studios, a film school behind bars, and was filmed by our inmate students currently incarcerated inside the Los Angeles County Jail. Welcome to Studio 42, here in the Los Angeles County Jail in Castilla, California. I'm Gary Hall, co-founder of Hollywood Impact Studios. Today's show is From Prison to the White House, and that's quite a journey. We're going to be interviewing a special man to us, Henry Lozano. Henry, that's quite a story. Can you tell us your background and what that journey was like?
First of all, thank you, Gary, for this opportunity and for what you're doing here and for the heart of what this ministry is all about. I would suggest that my story, in most cases, would seem common to everyone. Maybe a little bit of an unusuality in the sense that I come from a house with great parents, a dad that was a decorated staff sergeant in the Second World War, Golden Gloves boxer, exhibition boxer in the war, and a mom that we call the General, you know. Good family. 6 months into junior college. Somehow I stuck my arm out, a little bit too drunk. Somebody stuck a needle in my arm full of heroin. And from that point forward, I literally lost 9.5 years of my life. Growing up where I grew up, obviously, and still is to this very day, a transit point for heroin smuggling across the border, right on the Calexico border, Arizona, Yuma. Everybody just presumes you just jump into this and it's your choice. You made that decision. You had that needle stuck in your arm. You could have said right there, no. Well, I have a whole different perspective on that because of my mom and dad. I had no intent to become a tecato, a heroin addict. I had no intent to do that in my life. No intent to destroy my family's name. No intent to find myself in county jails, in federal penitentiaries, and in other kind of situations, and to see my dad's name, Henry C. Lozano, in the local Imperial Valley newspaper, smuggling heroin across the international border. I did something unusual because I grew up, I had intent to be my dad's right-hand man and all of that, so I was one of those addicts that worked every day, 7 days a week. Drove semi all over, hauled grain, hauled heavy equipment, did all of that, sticking a needle in my arm all day long. And at night, Dad didn't know I was driving that cab across the border, smuggling heroin, calling it official agricultural business, you know. I knew all those folks on the border, grew up there, and I hadn't quite made that public scene yet, so people didn't really understand what I was doing. Hadn't been busted yet, so, you know, I wasn't hot. And I ran. I did all of those crazy things that you do. Started packing a weapon, started thinking I was something important. All of a sudden people coming to me, got married and had babies. You know, just insanity. I was that guy living in that house in Central California with 15 other people sticking needles in their arms in my dining table when my kids are playing with their games underneath that table.
So for how long were you doing heroin before you got arrested?
About 3 years. And the escalation was just profound. I mean, from a kid just having a needle stuck in his arm to all of a sudden within a couple of months, I'm trafficking. And I'm believing inside of me this is the life. And everybody said, well, it was that time. That was the 60s, 70s. Everybody was doing that. No, everybody wasn't doing that. And I understood that clearly. And so for anybody today to tell me that, you know, these folks, they can quit anytime they want, they can stop doing what they want, I could have stopped every time, every day. Why didn't I?
At what point did your parents find out?
First time I got busted, you know, obviously a small community, right. You know, like I said, found myself in county jail and doing what I did. I was just busted the first time for being under the influence. Next thing you know, I'm busted on the border, international smuggling. Every time I was busted, every time, because of my background, my Catholic background, I'd get down on my knees and I'd pray. I'd ask God, help me, save me, get me out of this. I'll never do it again. that everybody calls today that jailhouse prison call, out to God to save your bones, And every time, first day I was out, didn't matter where it was, I was back in the spoon. My mom and dad used to come in to Terminal Island, brother, come in those big gates, and Dad would look at me and he'd say, "Man, you look good." Well, Dad was looking at a guy that was buffed out on purpose. I was going to protect myself inside that institution. Mom would look at me and my clothes were Bonnaroo, had no idea I had to pay a half a carton of cigarettes to have that done, to my clothes. And they would just, they were so wonderful, so caring, so just believing that their kids are going to come back home and do good. They came up with my wife and my 2 boys to pick me up at that federal institution when I was released, brother. And within a matter of 5 minutes, driving to a restaurant to go have my first outside lunch, my wife passes me the bag. Now, right there, after all of that praying and asking God to help me, I could have said, "No, honey, we're going to do something right. My 2 boys are looking at me. My mom and dad are in the car. And you're giving me the bag, lady." And all I could do is smile, an acknowledgement to my wife, an addict, that we were back on track. What a loss.
This is a production of Hollywood Impact Studios, a film school behind bars, and was filmed by our inmate students currently incarcerated inside the Los Angeles County Jail. What changed? What changed your life?
A mom and dad. Mom said, I went home, and this is 9.5 years later, went home and I was begging Mom for a little bit of money. I hadn't been working now for a year. I finally quit, and all I was doing was what I was doing. And went home, could ask Mom for some money. My mother was a very spiritual woman, and my mom always knew what was happening with all of us. Just had that spiritual instinct, was always praying, always asking God to help us. And I came up to the door. My mother was what they called a curandera. She was a healer woman in practice. And I came up, Mom looked at me and she just stepped back and she says, "Ay, Dios mío, tú tienes la cara del diablo, vas a morir." She said, "I had the face of the devil and I was going to die."
Oh, wow.
She could see it in me. And she said, "I just saw something on TV." She said, "They call it Team Challenge." She said, "I won't give you any money, but I'll fill up your car with gas. And I want you to take your wife, and I need you to go up there right now or you're going to die within the next 24 hours. On the way to San Diego Team Challenge, up that little mountain area, I was going to dump that car off that cliff. I knew right then my wife and I were never going to stop. My boys were going to be addicts just like Dad and their mom, just like my brother turned out, just like my little sister turned out. All of us were going to die in that hell. I knew that, and I was going to kill us.
Wow.
And my mom saw that. And I always laugh about this. My wife has passed. I always laugh about this today, that the only reason I didn't do that because I thought if I kill us, she's going to wake up in hell and beat the heck out of me. And, I really thought that, and I had no idea that was the first intervention that my gracious God intervened in my life. We made it all the way to San Diego Teen Challenge. These crazy ex-dope fiends, the director of the program and the ministry executives, said they were going to lay hands on me and ask God to do for me what he did for them, that I wasn't going to kick. And I thought, you know what, in my mind, brothers, I've been smuggling for a year straight now. I have more heroin than I've ever seen in my life. And I don't know what you were doing, but I'm going to kick. Just the way it works, Biologically, you're going to kick. And they said, "No, brother, God's going to show you that he's God." I waited for a day and a half, and nothing ever happened. And all of a sudden it connected. This is impossible. There is a God, and this God happens to be all over me, inside of me. I don't know how this stuff works, but there's a God. And from that point forward, that identity of behold, 2 Corinthians 5:17, behold, the past is passing away, the old. Behold, the new is coming into you. That gracious God entered my life through the person of his Son, covered me in his shed blood, lifted me to a place where I actually believed I was a new creation. Now that, brother, at that point in juncture, is called insanity. There's no way that happens like that. And here I was just beaming and wanting to be thankful and wanting to be everything I hadn't been for 9.5 years. Didn't matter that I was a sissy all of a sudden that I didn't kick. I had a whole new moniker. I was some resurrected guy, you know. Whole new platform to live on I didn't understand, and God continued to provide me his word.
Wow.
That was January 7th, 1974.
Wow.
And I have been one clean puppy since January 7th, 1974. Never walked back out, never took on that lifestyle again, stayed with that ministry for 11 years, became the director of the very center that I walked into. At that time, it was the third largest teen challenge in the world. Blessed my life, blessed my family, went home the last 3 years to start a teen challenge in the Imperial Valley to bring the good name of Lozano Jr. back to my dad and make them proud as puppies that their boy was home and doing good. And all the typical stories, black sheep comes home, does good, you know, and it was the best time in my life to do that for mom and dad.
The prodigal son, as it were.
Absolutely.
This is a production of Hollywood Impact Studios, a film school behind bars, and was filmed by our inmate students currently incarcerated inside the Los Angeles County Jail. So Henry, you've now kicked the habit. How long were you actually part of the Teen Challenge, working with their programs?
In the early years, it was 4 to 6 months, and I graduated in 4 months.
Okay.
And I became a junior staff in the training mode.
And then how long were you with Teen Challenge in their staff?
In their leadership capacity, I eventually, in a year and a half, became the executive director of Riverside Teen Challenge. It was about a year and a half after I became that executive director and then kept leading that operation. Then became the director of Orange County Teen Challenge a number of years later on the city circle, and then went home to do what was the dream of my life, to pioneer a teen challenge where I grew up. Wow. You know, the bad sheep comes back home, does good. So I connected with Victory Outreach and Campus Crusade for Christ and all of these other ministries, and we started doing what they call crusades in the Imperial Valley, and all the folks that knew me, you know, couldn't believe I was back because the news was there. And I guess the most proudest thing that I can remember is Dad's name was finally in the good light, you know, and his son was home, and he was pioneering Teen Challenge and doing good in the Imperial Valley. On my board of directors at Teen Challenge, I had the court judge that sent me to the federal pen. Wow. I had the captain of the police department, who was a narcotics officer before that sent me. Wow. And busted me over and over again. I had all of these folks that played a role in my past life in different arenas were now on my board of directors. Wow. It was an incredible time. Wow.
So now, after Teen Challenge, how did your life change? You had mentioned before that you ended up, I believe, meeting then Governor George W. Bush. Tell us a little about that.
It actually started at the very end of my career in Teen Challenge. I started to realize that as a director of Teen Challenge in Riverside and Orange County and in the Imperial Valley, that if you weren't out there working with the community constituencies and the departments of mental health and drug abuse control services, you were just some isolated faith-based organization. You had to engage, and with law enforcement. Right. So I started, the operations, Orange County and Imperial Valley, were outreaches. They weren't residential communities. Okay. So it afforded me the opportunity in those latter years to engage in those kinds of positions, to go on the county advisory board with the Department of Mental Health and Drug Abuse Control Services, and engage in all of that kind of stuff. And when I finally left Teen Challenge in 1986, I was invited to compete for a position as a drug abuse counselor with Riverside County Department of Mental Health, and there were 15 folks that had degrees. I was the only guy that didn't have a degree, and there was only one position. And you can imagine what the Lord did. I secured the post. I became a drug counselor for a couple of years with Riverside County Mental Health. I had the most incredible time to understand the other side of the picture. What was it like for those folks to have to deal with caseloads of gang members and drug addicts and alcoholics and try to help them, and it was an unbelievable world for me. And that started that whole process of understanding that if you're really going to make an impact anywhere, you have to be in the middle of the process. And you've got to be engaged at certain levels. And the more I understood, the more that I engaged in, the more commissions and organizational groups that I was part of, boards of directors, the more other folks wanted me to be part of what they were doing. And in 1990, I created a drug prevention movement called the Western States Youth Alliance. And I did it for my two boys. Because Pops had that fear that my two boys after high school could take the same road that Dad did. And so I created this drug prevention movement that was not just on campus. We traveled to other schools and to big community conferences. This wasn't anti-drugs. This was about the gifts that those kids had, what we could engage them in. And what all high school kids, I found out, wanted was to be a leader. So all of a sudden we could turn these high school kids into leaders when we took them into junior highs to be group counselors. And we trained them to do this. And in 1990, President Bush recognized me as one of the top 10 people in the nation and invited me to Washington, D.C. to literally keynote the very beginning of his drug prevention conference in the nation in 1990. And we kept launching all these projects and just kept growing. And the next thing you know, from the Bush citation, President Bush in 1990, in 1998, President Clinton invited me to become one of the original 11 team that became the President's Advisory Commission on Drug-Free Communities. So from that commission, because it was bipartisan, I rolled into President Bush day one. So I served him day one. Within a matter of a couple of months, the president had reappointed me. I was already on the commission. And reappointed me as the co-chair with First Lady Hope Taft. So we orchestrated that whole movement for a couple of years. Then the president asked me if I would assume a new role, go through Senate confirmation, the highest appointment factor in the nation, and go on to the board of directors of the Corporation for National Community Service. An honor and a half. I couldn't believe it. And that corporation was created by President Clinton. So it was a bipartisan board again, by presidential appointment, Senate confirmation. Served there for a number of years until the White House finally asked if I would serve the president directly and become the director of the USA Freedom Corps, which is the 9/11 office for the nation. And what an honor to actually serve in that capacity. It was an executive order office, which meant that I worked directly for the President of the United States. Our meetings were in the Oval Office, and the opportunity to engage with the President in those last 2 years, 07 and 08, were phenomenal. So from 1998 all the way to 2008, I was under presidential appointment every day till I left the White House. The end of 08, the end of the administration.
That is quite a journey.
Yes, it has been.